Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Take her away, Ian.
Yeah, take it away, Ernie. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Joan Esposito.
Whoa, that's an explosive sentence.
On WCPT 820.
You know, it's interesting that I was just talking with Picayune Sentinel columnist Eric Zorn and asking him what he read, what newsletters, what sources of information. I recently stumbled across a newsletter that I really liked, and that means I liked it enough to actually sign up to get it delivered into my email box. It's called The Handbasket, and it's written by Marisa Kabas, who joins us now. Marisa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here.
Well, a couple of the things that you've written lately that I really want to talk about is on November 11th, you wrote, "It's time to lose our heads," which I frankly appreciated. And then on the 15th, you reflected something else that had been inside me, how Democrats are modeling acquiescence. You talked about it. You've got a picture there of that a moment when Joe and Jill Biden walked out after meeting with Donald Trump, and they all just have these big, cheery smiles like they are best friends, and they just had the best time ever. It was a photo that, frankly, a lot of my listeners, Marisa, said that they thought was really creepy and inappropriate because we know Donald Trump and that he's a very bad man. And it would be, it's one thing you meet with him because you're supposed to meet with him. But do you have to come out and look like it's all puppy dogs and ice cream cones? Let's talk about how Democrats are modeling acquiescence.
Sure. So I think that there's a difference between being principled and having decorum, even though I don't necessarily think we need that at this moment either. But there's a difference between, the bare minimum and going above and beyond to make this new administration feel comfortable. And by inviting Donald Trump into the Oval Office, the office that he used to occupy, that he's going to occupy again, that he is so disrespected and denigrated over the years, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not really sure what the White House is thinking.
Yeah. And even if that's a tradition, and we all know Joe Biden is nothing if a guy who abides by tradition, and this is the way we've always done things, this is the way we're going to keep on doing things. But still, even if you're going to pose for a picture, there's a way of showing in a picture, yes, I'm here, this was the right thing to do, but it's not like, he and I are going to be planning a double date anytime soon. I guess that's what bothered a lot of my listeners, is that it would be one thing to come out from that meeting and, have a solemn photograph taken, but they kind of look giddy, and it kind of makes you wonder. It just kind of makes you wonder, because it would be one thing if a photograph like that, if it was a means to an end, if Joe Biden knew that by, really, buttering up Donald Trump, that somehow he could soften him or ameliorate the worst of his impulses. But we know that's not true. I know that's not true. I hope to God Joe Biden knows that's not true.
Yeah,
it seems like too much.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's really strange how he doesn't realize at this point that so much about politics is optics. And so if he's not aware that that photo is going to reflect poorly upon him and his party, and he's been doing this for so long, it's hard to understand what his point of view was when he's been doing this forever. And he knows that a picture is worth a million words at this point, especially when it spreads on social media within 0.5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as you see the waning days of the Biden administration, what do you see from either the Congress or the Senate? Anything you see that gives you hope? For instance, the fact that the fact that at least part of the pressure that got Matt Gaetz to step away was our very own congressman from Illinois, Sean Casten, saying that he was going to make the entire House vote on whether or not to release the report. And if the vote got defeated, he was going to bring it again, and he was going to bring it again, and he was going to bring it again, which at the very least would embarrass the heck out of them and certainly keep it in the public eye. Yay, Sean Casten. I'm a little concerned that I don't really feel like I've gotten that kind of fight out of the White House. What do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. We need more fight like that. We need that spirit. I mean, listen, Democrats are down bad. The Republicans have control of both houses and the White House. We have few levers of power still at our disposal, but it doesn't mean that we don't have any.
Right.
And I think that we need to remember that and not just roll over and say, well, what's done is done. The voters have spoken. And so, you know, I like I wrote and like you said, I've noticed that there are Democrats that just don't seem to have that fight in them. Like, for example, Leader Hakeem Jeffries has really disappointed me this week in this whole ridiculous faux controversy over the use of bathrooms at the Capitol for incoming Rep. Sarah McBride, who is trans. I was really hoping that he would come out swinging and say, you have all this power and this is what you're doing with it. You know, we are going to protect our own no matter what. And he made, you know, a kind of mild statement, but didn't do nearly enough to draw a line and say, you're not going to do this. Let's get to the real governing. So I can't say that I've seen a lot of great examples so far of people really taking the reins and using what little power that they have.
Mm-hmm. And what you just talked about, Hakeem Jeffries making a statement but not really maybe being particularly passionate about it or aggressive about it, that is something that I see over and over again with the Democrats. That's why, you know, when I saw this thing about Sean Casten, I was like, whoa, you know, because it stood out because stuff like that doesn't come from the Democratic side very often, where we use the rules to bring a vote over and over again, if for nothing else than to make Republicans go on the record as saying, well, yeah, I'm not going to release that report, and something they have to defend for the rest of their careers. I agree with you. I agree with you that Hakeem Jeffries should have come out and said anything that was as passionate, as half as passionate as Nancy Mace was when she was flailing her arms and shaking her head that she didn't want anybody that wasn't born a woman in her bathroom. Oh, my God, how could you make us do this? And when are we going to fight fire with fire, Marisa?
I know. I mean, we keep waiting for that, and Sean Casten is setting a really good example. Listen, it's only been 2 weeks since Election Day, even though it feels like it's been a million.
It has been 10 years. Don't you kid me. I have lived this. It is at least a decade.
I know. I believe you. Maybe there's been some sort of time warp. I'm not sure. But when you look at it, it hasn't been that long. So I think that Democrats are – I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, which maybe I shouldn't be, but they're calibrating and trying to figure out how they're going to deal with a second Trump administration when it's something that they never expected that they would have to do again. And we thought surely after the insurrection, this would never be a problem again. Surely that he would be convicted of one of his many crimes. Surely we would have this nipped in the bud at some point in some court, and yet here we are again just 4 years later, and we're having to completely change our mindset. And so I'm just hoping that as things get real, as we get closer to the inauguration, or once we get to inauguration, that Dems will realize, like, it's time to kick into gear, and just because we're the minority doesn't mean that we're powerless.
Yes, indeed. I'm talking to Marisa Kabas, who writes something called The Handbasket. You really, really, really want to read this. You can get it on your browser. Go to thehandbasket.co, or you can just Google it. Just Google it, and you can sign up for her newsletters. We are going to take a break and talk about more of her writing right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Marisa Kabas writes a newsletter called The Handbasket, and one of her recent articles was, "It's time to lose our heads. Giving up isn't an option, but playing by the same old rules isn't one either." Kind of a continuation of the discussion, Marisa, we were having right before the break. What are the new rules you think we should be playing by?
Well, I certainly think that it's time for new voices to take control of the Democratic Party. I think for the last few cycles, the same old people, the folks who ran the first and second Obama campaign and people who came up, when digital campaigning first became a thing, they have been in charge for quite some time now. And I think there's just a lot of antiness and impatience with the way that they handle things. And it's just frankly not working. I mean, even though we've won most of the popular votes, we have not won all the electoral college votes, and so we need to try something different. And so I think that could mean putting younger people in charge, but not necessarily even. I mean, I think of people like Barbara Lee, who is so clear-headed and so moral and really understands what needs to be done in a slightly more maybe progressive, radical context than some other Democratic leaders. But I think overall what we need to do is not keep tacking to the center. I don't think that's getting us anywhere, and I don't think that's winning the respect of Republicans, because the Republican Party has become completely radicalized. And so there's people who still talk about sensible Republicans, and I don't really think those people exist anymore. I think that there are true believer Republicans. I think there are people who are kind of confused somewhere in the middle, not really sure. And then there are Democrats and progressives. And so what we need to do is get our own people to turn out and not try to pick off people from the other side. And I think we also need to rethink the concept of reaching across the aisle. People say that a lot, and it's considered a political virtue to reach across the aisle and try to work in a bipartisan way. I think when I think of reaching across the aisle, we need to grab people and not meet them on the other side. Bring them over. Show them why it's actually good over here, why we're going to be giving them the things that they need, and not, to use the word again, acquiesce to the things that we assume they might want. I think a lot about how Kamala talked a lot about on the campaign trail about owning a gun. And I just thought that was crazy because Democrats are supposed to be the anti-gun party. So I'm like, why are we throwing them this bone? What is this going to get us? And ultimately,
so you think that the Democratic Party needs to be more progressive, more openly embracing of progressive platforms and ideas to be successful? Because there's a lot of people arguing that that's exactly the problem. Tom Nichols wrote recently in The Atlantic that, the Democratic Party should worry less about stands on particular issues and more on what it takes to win, be a more pragmatic party. Not that the different stands have to be repudiated, but maybe they don't have to be the central platforms of the party, that we've got to form a broad base if we want to win, and that means maybe not always acquiescing to the different pressure groups. He pointed out, the way he tells it, the Trump campaign used that soundbite from Kamala about, transgender people in prisons should have access to medical care. And his argument is that she was pressured into making a public statement about that because the ACLU was fighting some sort of case and they wanted her to make a public statement, but that maybe in the context of a bigger picture and a bigger country and a bigger election, maybe that should have been an issue that she didn't want to address publicly. And that maybe that would have, it's those polarizing stands that he was arguing make it difficult to win the general elections. You seem to be saying the exact opposite of that, or I'm confused. So straighten me out here, Marisa.
No, No, you're absolutely right. I mean, Tom is coming from a Republican point of view, and I'm coming from a progressive point of view. I know that he's changed his views somewhat, moderated them over the years, but, I don't think that the Democratic Party should be taking cues from Republicans. I couldn't disagree more that we should step away from the most marginalized and the most endangered people in our society in order to win, because in that way we're sacrificing our values. I think that the best thing we can do, and what I was alluding to before, is that Democrats are the party against guns. We're against demonizing immigrants. We're against violating human rights. So just stand firm in those. Things like that soundbite that you referred to, that's a specific thing that's going to get played over and over again. If I'm not mistaken, that was from 2019, so it wasn't even something that recently happened.
No, it was an oldie.
Yeah. And so, if they're going to use a clip from 4 years ago and blast it out everywhere, they're going to do that. But that doesn't mean that it's representative of the party as a whole, and that we're focusing too much on these so-called fringe issues. I mean, look at the DNC. I watched every night of the DNC. Trans people were not mentioned once. Not a single time. There, not even just not a trans speaker. Not any of the other speakers mentioned the attacks on trans people. And now look where we are. The very first thing that's happening in this Congress. So it's kind of like letting them write the playbook. They're saying we're so obsessed with these issues, and meanwhile they're the ones who are obsessed with it. And so I think we need to make it clear that they're obsessed with kind of things that are weird, as Tim Walz put it, and we're obsessed with protecting people, and that's not weird.
I realize that misogyny and racism played an outside role, and there's also a worldwide trend that the data scientists are identifying about incumbents being thrown out in lots of elections. But when you look at this last election, how do you think people justified voting for such an incredibly reprehensible human being?
That's the thing that's been hardest for me these last couple of weeks. And I'm honestly still trying to figure it out, just like the rest of the country. I think maybe it was a reminder that the misogyny and the racism are even more baked into this country's fabric than we had thought. People have talked about we're in a post-racial society, and it's been all these years since the civil rights movement, and why is everything about race? But when you look at it, how could this election not at least been in part about race? Ever since Barack Obama was elected president, Republicans have been on a tear trying to frighten white people and make them feel like their status in this society is under siege. And they've been successful at it. And I think that just shows, the results of this election showed that their project of making white grievance the national pastime has been pretty successful.
Yeah. I think that the election of Barack Obama scared a lot of people deeply. And, I know it's going to be difficult to quantify, even though the data researchers have told me that they have special trick questions that they can ask people to figure out whether or not they were actually motivated by racism. But I remember right before the election, my partner was talking to our next door neighbor, who's just the sweetest, most loving human being. And he said he was really worried about this election. And, of course, we were like, it's going to be great. And we're knocking on doors and there's all this money and all this groundswell. And when it turned out he was right, we said, what gave you that impression? And he said, I thought that there were going to be a lot of people who, when they got in the privacy of a voting booth, simply couldn't bring themselves to vote for a black woman. And I think there was a lot of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there was this idea that this particular black woman, Kamala Harris, is not going to fight for me, a white man or a white woman, that she is looking out for minorities more than me. And it's a narrative. It's a narrative that's been created, and I think that the idea that, a rising tide lifts all ships is not the American way. I just need to lift my own ship. And so that's what Donald Trump is selling. He's saying if you are savvy and cunning and don't care about playing by the rules, you too can become president of the United States twice. And so it's just sending all the wrong messages, but unfortunately people have fully absorbed them, and I think that makes them feel okay about voting for him.
Ugh. Marisa, our time has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful.
And again, the newsletter is called, it's easy to remember, it's called The Handbasket. And you can find it online at thehandbasket.co.